Yeah, I could make that. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this board of Wenge, I'm going to cut it into several smaller pieces that I'm then going to glue back together, side by side, to make the neck. The reason I do this is because multiple boards glued together this way are going to be stronger and more stable than if I just had one single board. So once they're cut, I'm going to put on the glue and clamp them all together. So after the glue is dry and I've got the ends cleaned up, I'm going to go in and route a channel for the truss rod. Of course, since the rotor bit is round, I'm going to have to go into the chisel and square up the ends of the truss rod channel. Once that's done, I can begin working on the neck and bit. Here I'm cutting an angle for the headstock. Alright, now that's ready, I'm going to put in the truss rod and glue on the fretboard. So I'll start by putting down a piece of tape so that the glue doesn't get down into the truss rod channel and stop the truss rod from actually working. Then I'm going to spread the glue over top of it. Alright, so once I've done that, I'm going to glue on the fretboard. It's a piece of Santos rosewood. Looks really nice. So just got to clamp that all in place and let the glue dry. And then once the glue is dry, I'm going to go to my rotor table. I'm going to remove the excess fretboard material from the edges of the neck. And once the edges are cleaned up, I'm going to go to a bandsaw and I'm going to cut away the excess material from the sides of the neck. Alright, once that's done, I'm going to begin cutting the fret slots by hand. So a lot of this design that I used is based entirely on what was visible in the game, and the guitar in the game appeared to have 22 frets, so that's how many I put on this neck. Once the fret slots are cut, I'm going to take a radius block and slowly sand in the radius of the fretboard. And once I'm done with the radius block, I'm going to use a leveling beam to make sure that the whole fretboard is still straight. And so once I'm done with that, I get to do a little bit more shaping work on the neck. I'm going to cut away the material from the back of the headstock and the excess from the back of the neck. So I'm going to begin installing the frets. Let's hammer the fret in at each end, cut away the remaining fret wire, and then finish hammering in the fret. And so once the frets are in, we're going to begin carving the profile of the neck. I do this by hand as well, using a saw rasp. Well, the way I do this, I carve a series of facets onto the back of the neck, each set of facets getting smaller and smaller until the neck is essentially round. And then, of course, doing a bit more rounding work on top of that. And using a half-round rasp, I'm going to shape the volute for the neck, and then sand it all smooth. Alright, so now I'm working on the shape of the headstock. I've got a couple of excess pieces glued onto the sides because it needed to be a little bit wider than what the material actually was. Again, this headstock is modeled after what was visible in the game. It's not an exact match to what was in the game. Then again, the one that was visible in the game was a 6-string guitar, so I'm having to make some changes simply to accommodate the fact that this is going to be an 8-string. Once with the headstock shaped, I can begin drilling for the tuners. So now that most of the neck work is done, I need to glue on some excess pieces to the body because this blank so far is not quite wide enough. Again, more Wenge. Now the reason I used Wenge, it's a very durable, very stable wood. It responds very well to guitars that are, have these extended ranges like additional strings going up to 8 strings. And it also, because it's such a stable wood, doesn't require much in the way of finish. But it's also a nice dark color. It's a fairly consistent wood in terms of what the grain is like from one piece to another. And I thought that would match what was in the game pretty well also, just because the one in the game, it didn't have a lot of kind of texture detail to the body of the guitar. So having a really a wood that's really consistent in appearance seemed like it would match the game the best. So here I'm gluing on a couple of extra pieces just because these upper horns need a little bit more. And then with those glued in, I need to cut away the excess and get them close to their final shape. So once all that is on there, I'm going to go to spindle sander and begin refining the shape of the body. So to add one of the details to the front of the body, I'm using the excess material that was taken off of the fretboard, and I'm going to begin cutting that into a circle. And after it's cut into a circle and worked to be fully round, I'm going to use my spindle sander again to add some textural details around the outside edges. So now I've got this Doomslayer symbol, going to begin carving that into this circle so that you can go ahead and fill it with some nice glowing resin. The symbol is transferred onto the piece of wood. And I'm going to use a precision router base attached to a Dremel with a precision router bit and carve out the material from where I've marked out the symbol. Make a couple of passes just to get it to the depth that I want. And then I'm going to fill it using some epoxy resin that has a red glow-in-the-dark powder mixed in. And just hitting it with some flames to get rid of the bubbles in the resin. And you can see how that glowing powder was beginning to sink into the symbol itself. Here I'm carving out a round area in the front of the body for this to sit in. It's a fairly snug fit. And I'm going to begin carving some details onto the front of the body near the bottom. Just doing the very rough first pass with an angle grinder, and then just for a bit of decorative burning around that circle. Now that the resin's fully cured, I'm going to go in with a random orbital sander and remove all of the excess. I'm going to take the Dremel with the carving bit and add a little bit more detail to this lower area of the body. Add some finer details than what the angle grinder could do. Now again, these details here aren't quite an exact match to what was in the game. Again, this is an 8-string instead of a 6-string, so some of these details ended up a little bit more crowded onto the edges of the body than they might have if I had done the 6-string. And then here, just to add a bit more flavor to the circle there, I'm going to do a bit more burning. Here I'm drilling out the cavity for the pickup. Again, this is where my design differs a bit from what was in the game. In the game you could see a single coil pickup at the bridge and a humbucker up by the neck. I only put a single humbucker at the bridge. There's an odd mix of details on this guitar where I stuck really close to what was in the game and other areas where I differed from what was in the game. Some of those differences are entirely for playability reasons. I couldn't make it exactly like it was in the game because it would, you know, like the way the headstock appears in the game, you couldn't actually tune the guitar. You know, things like that. Yeah, so here I'm working on the side dots, using some more of that glowing powder, and I'm just going to fill up the little holes that I drilled and then flood some super glue over that to solidify them. And get the little bubble out of that one. And working on another little detail piece. In the game there's like a little red gem or jewel or something like that way down at the bottom of the body. So here I'm making that out of a piece of bloodwood. And then we get to the blade. So this is more epoxy resin, and it's got a red sort of metallic powder mixed into it. Here I'm just trying to swirl that around, make it look interesting. And then I'm going to add in some more resin with some of the glow-in-the-dark powder, just kind of swirl that in around the edges of the blade. So after a few days, the resin's cured, and I get to take it back out of the mold. And from here, the surface is not entirely smooth, the front or the back, so I'm going to spend some time with random orbital sander and try to even that all out. So once the surface is roughly sanded, it's fairly smooth, about 320 grit. I'm going to begin, you can see I've got this piece of paper here where I've drawn out all of the symbols that appear on the blade in the game. And I'm going to very carefully cut out the shapes of those symbols using a little X-Acto knife. And then once those have all been cut in, I'm going to take a Sharpie and draw through the little cuts so that I know where I need to route away material to make these symbols on the blade itself. Now, luckily, looking at images from the game, it became apparent that the symbols on each side of the blade are exactly the same, just one side is the exact mirror image of the other, so I was able to use that same paper template on both sides of this blade just by flipping it over. So once all the symbols are marked out, I'm going back to this precision router and going to carve out the shapes of all of these symbols up and down both sides of the blade. It's a very time-consuming process. So here I'm just taking a rasp and roughing up the edges of the blade a little bit, just to give them a little bit of character. Then I'm going to pour in some more of this glowing resin, and this resin is going to fill in all of the little symbols that I've carved out, as well as flow onto those roughed up edges, so that the edges are going to glow as well. So after another few days, all that's cured. I'm going to go in with random orbital sander again and remove all the excess. I ended up with a fairly thick coat of resin all over the whole front of the blade after doing this. So I had to remove quite a bit to get it down to where only the symbols were filled in with glowing resin and there weren't any pools of it left on top. So then I went in with a round over router bit just to round over the back edges of the blade, just so that's a little bit more comfortable. So after I've done that, I'm going to go in and spray on a few coats of a high gloss lacquer just to put some shine back onto this. You can see the symbols in there. Now this blade is not totally transparent, you can see through it a little bit. But for the most part, it stays red. Now here I'm just doing some more fret work. First I'm leveling all the frets. Then I'm going to have to check and make sure there are no high or low frets. And that came out pretty well. So now I have to be able to get the blade into the body somehow. So the way I'm going to do that is by cutting a big slot right up the middle of the body. I've done the first cut, move the fence, and go in for the second cut. So it was giving me a little bit of trouble. I couldn't quite get the metal section to come out on the bandsaw, but a little bit of work with the chisel from the side, and it lifts right out. So from here, going back in with the torch a little bit to make it look like the blade being there or turning on and off has kind of scorched the edges of the body. So now I need to get the blade into place. So just simply slide it right in. It's a pretty snug fit. So there we go. So it's not quite straight. How would Doomguy fix this?
Carefully release the hinge. The hinge. The hinge.
Perfect. So now I need to permanently attach the blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a couple of holes and then screw it in. I thought about using more epoxy to glue it in place, but this seemed a lot less messy. So those first two screws are in the back, the second pair of screws are in the front, and they're going to be underneath the circular plate that I'm gluing on. And then I'm going to put a couple of Wenge plugs over the screws on the back. And then once those are sanded flat, not bad. So now there's a big gap in the bottom of the body right here. So I'm going to take that piece that I cut out of the middle I've glued a couple of extra pieces of wood onto the top and bottom of it so that it actually fills this gap completely. And then I'm going to glue it in. I'm going to glue on the little bloodwood decorative piece and the Doomslayer symbol. So now I need to be able to get a jack onto this so that it can actually be hooked up to an amp. And I ended up deciding to take that straight up the bottom of the body. So I'm going in with a 7/8 inch Forstner bit. Just going to drill a hole. And then once all that's in there and wired up, or before everything's wired up, I'm going to do one thin coat of guitar finishing oil. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this wood is Wenge. It doesn't strictly need a finishing oil or any finish on it at all. It's very stable and resistant to rot. But putting on the oil really brought out the color of some of the wood and also evened out the color of the body, which was pretty nice. I'm also going to apply it to the fretboard. You can see the fretboard looks really nice with that oil on it. And then I'm going to put in the tuners. It's a set of Hipshot open gear locking tuners. And then installing the bridge, also a Hipshot bridge. And you can see I had to take out several of the saddles to actually get the screws in there. So now putting in the ferrules on the back, just going to lightly tap those in with a hammer. And then putting in the pickup. This is a lace death bucker 3.5 inch, so intended for 7 and 8 string guitars. Here with that wired up, just checking, and we have sound. Now there are no volume or tone controls, just the pickup directly to the jack, and here we can see the resin glowing in the dark. And under black light. So now, what do I play on this? So that is how I made the guitar from Doom Eternal. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Isn't quite exactly the same as what's in the game, but that's not really what I set out to do to begin with. Now there are too many little differences to really cover in this video, but I'll cover a couple just really quickly. The one in the game obviously is a 6-string, and this is not a 6-string. I ended up deciding to put 8 strings on it because, you know, that's what was used to play the songs in the soundtrack for Doom. And it just seemed like, I don't know, what was the point in making a guitar from Doom if it can't play the songs from Doom? So I scaled it up to 8 strings. I made it a pretty long scale length, 660 millimeters or roughly 26 inches. Other big change from what was in the game, the one you can see in the game had 2 pickups in it. It had a single coil in the bridge and a humbucker in the neck. I ended up only putting a humbucker in the bridge position for a couple different reasons. One, it seems more fitting for this instrument to have a humbucker in the bridge position. It sounds great. But apart from that, because of the way it's constructed, having, you know, this blade going up the middle of it and this big slot cut in it, I didn't want to remove any more material up here just for structural reasons. It seemed like not the best idea. Now the pickup I ended up putting here in the bridge is a lace deathbucker. It's a really nice pickup. It looks amazing, which is part of the reason why I chose this pickup. The other reason I chose it is it's a very low noise pickup, which is great for this guitar in particular because there's no volume or tone controls on it anywhere. So it's just the pickup going directly to the jack. To make a point of how quiet this pickup is, the amp is still on right now, and it's silent. So that is awesome. That's about all I have time to cover for this guitar in this video. If you have any other questions about the build or decisions that were made or other changes, feel free to leave those in the comments below. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. Otherwise, if there are enough questions, I might make a separate Q&A video just to go over what people want to know. Like I said, thank you all for watching, and hope you'll see you on the next one. Anyway, here's Wonderwall.